Hello and welcome to Software Engineering Daily. My name is Joe Nash, and today I am delighted to be joined by Jay Tholen, game developer, musician, probably most well known for Hypnospace Outlaws, but there's plenty of other games beside. Jay, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to kick off with, your game development journey so far. I mentioned Hypnospace Outlaw, which is certainly the game that I'm most familiar with from your back catalogue, but you've also worked on some other titles, Dropsy, Slayer X, and an upcoming game. Can you tell me a little bit about how game development started for you?
Yeah, I started game development. It's a little foggy exactly where I found this, but I found a demo of a program called Click and Play. I think it was on a Sim Tower CD. And Click and Play is a easy to use game development software from the 90s. Maxis bought sort of the rights to distribute it, I think, for a short time, so it got decently popular. And I might be wrong about that, but it was packaged with a lot of Maxis stuff, though. So, but anyway, and I used that to make things that really weren't games, but more like ripped sprites of Goku bouncing around with like a corn MIDI file in the background, and like I don't know, just like whatever I could scrounge around, like threw it in there and sort of made like a little 8-direction game where you shoot fireballs at Goku. I don't know, but that's how I got started, and then I just used that software, which really helped me sort of hone, I guess, I don't even know if it was called that back then, but pixel art skills. And then I got really into pixel art and tracker music, because both of those things are something you could use with the Click and Play / Games Factory software. And yeah, that's how I got started. And ever since I was, we got a computer in 97, so I was about 10 or 11. And ever since then, I've been, doing it professionally only the last third of my life. But yeah.
Right, so yeah, let's talk about that last third. So my impression, I might be wrong here, is that Dropsy was your first quote-unquote professional game. Is that correct?
Yeah, Dropsy was my first commercial game, like legitimate commercial game. Like some I threw online and tried to charge like 99 cents for them, but I had no reach or anything, so they became free very quickly.
Perfect. And so then after that, obviously, we have Hypnospace Outlaw. So that's where we're going to be spending quite a lot of the time today. I have lots of questions about that. So I guess for folks who aren't familiar with the game, who haven't experienced it yet, and bearing in mind that it is quite a unique game as a concept, can you tell us what Hypnospace Outlaw is and describe it a bit?
Yeah, Hypnospace Outlaw is an internet and operating system simulator set in an alternate reality 1999. And we sort of pretend that a technology exists that allows you to surf the web or use a computer while you're sleeping. And you do this by like sort of imagining that you're typing on a keyboard in your dream or in your sleep or something like that. And and then somehow the device, which the device is actually like it's almost like a glorified monitor, and that also reads your inputs. And then it hooks up, it's a peripheral, though it hooks up to your PC, which then does processing. And then so you kind of have to be hooked up to your computer at all times, even though you're sleeping, which, we should have done some kind of like strangulation angle, but then think about that. Yeah, but that's what it is. And you basically have a simulated operating system and a walled garden internet service that you explore, maybe not unlike AOL's like homepage communities or GeoCities neighborhoods, and you moderate it. You are an enforcer, which gives us a good excuse to like close off why you can't access like chats and stuff, because it wouldn't be fair or some junk, I don't know. And you're an enforcer, and you have a set of rules, and you have to go out and find violations that people have broken the rules, and sort of you have a little gavel tool, and you hammer the element on their page where the rule was broken, and then you get paid.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that's a very comprehensive description. And for folks who hear that initial operating system simulator, internet simulator, it's definitely I was shocked at how comprehensive it was, how large this internet slice was. I'd highly recommend checking it out. We'll definitely come back to the gameplay elements of that later. But first, I want to talk about the concept. So that concept that you described there, to my understanding from hearing you speak before, was not the original concept for the game, right? It grew out of another game you released called Hypnospace Enforcer, not Outlaw. How did that happen? Like, how do your games often, when you have the initial vision for a game, do you often find that the end result is different or changes along the path of development, or is this a unique experience?
Yeah, that happens all the time because I have a motivation problem, and I try to keep motivation. I have to follow what is piquing my interest the most at any given time, and well, the operating system and internet sort of simulator side of things, I was finding more exciting, and also I was sharing development footage of it on Twitter and elsewhere, and people were responding really well to that. So I was like, you know what? I'm having more fun doing this, because the original game, Hypnospace Enforcer, was a more or less like an endless runner game. And the sequel, Hypnospace Outlaw, would have been the same, but you can go in two directions. You can flip and go left and right on an endless information superhighway. And the internet part was in there, like the operating system part was in there, but it was really just a way to see, to look at the person's page you were hunting down to get clues about how to find them on the highway, and also to see sort of what they had done wrong, and sort of get maybe some empathy for them before you throw them into jail and stuff. But yeah, that it was going to be a large part. At least half of the game was going to be highway stuff, and people's operating stuff would have been visible in the highway. It's it's a play on information superhighway, the kind of buzzword. So if you had a virtual pet on your desktop, it would have been shown following your car on the highway. Or if you bumped into someone's car, maybe it would spill files out that they had on their hard drive, and you could just kind of steal files from them. Kind of a cartoony information superhighway treatment. That's what it was going to be. Inspired a lot by those ads where you're flying through 3D space, to connect with someone in Australia through email. That marketing kind of gave this very I don't know, cartoony, sensational idea of what it's like to be on the web. It's like a new era and stuff. And so the game was kind of playing into that a lot. But yeah, the whole web sort of more dry, adding little tinkery features, all of that just really, me and Mike Lash, who's the other main person who worked on this, he did coding and some design. We just found that more of an enjoyable direction to take. So
that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love the metaphor of the information superhighway. I do often find, I think, that the images and renderings and marketing for what it's like to surf the internet are much more compelling than actually surfing the internet. So I'm glad you explored that direction.
That sense of disappointment is a big part of this game too. Like when in '97, when I first got a computer, I'm like, okay, where is it? Where's the 3D world where I'm chatting with, in movies and stuff? It just looks so much cooler than the reality. And I still liked it, but it wasn't what I was hoping. So I wanted to capture that here too.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned there, and obviously in the past, that as you were developing those early concepts, fans and people who are following your work really grabbed onto the fake operating system. And this is a bit of a thing that's kind of become a genre. And I think aside from Hypnospace Outlaw, Zachtronic's game Last Call BBS also kind of explores this, and there's a lot of other titles in the genre. Why is it that you think people, really enjoy playing with what is essentially their desktop computer, but, amped up and made into a game?
That's an interesting question. We actually weren't sure how accessible it would be because computers, mobile computing is having a large influence on PCs now. And we took the game to a show, and at that time it was the default behavior was double clicking to open a program, and everyone was clicking once on the desktop icons. Nothing was opening, and then they would leave, and they thought it was broken, or just I don't know what they thought, but I'm assuming they thought it was broken because they left. And at that point, we had a big talk about, oh, maybe we need to make it single click, but instead we just put a giant like sign that points at an icon at the very beginning that's like double click here to get started. Because I think our audience is still people who have some computer experience or something. But to answer your question, yeah, I guess in part, I guess it depends on if maybe your age and your experience with computers. I think a lot of younger people feel maybe they missed out on this era where people even really used desktop icons much at all. And I feel like they, according to like our reviews and some of the feedback I've had from younger people, like who are too young to have been on the web in that late 90s, early 2000s era, like it's almost to them feels like a period piece or something, like a time machine thing, like and there's even been teachers who messaged me about like just if it's okay if their class plays it or whatever. I don't know if that ever happened, but and so I guess it for some people it's that kind of thing. I think I've told this anecdote before, but in my high school there was like in our art class there was like a little corner of like people who had this like weird like 60s, like late 60s subculture thing coming back in our art class where they were like really into like the Woodstock Festival and the Doors and the whole mystique around all that, like Jimi Hendrix and all that era, and were wearing the clothes. And the art teacher was like kind of ragging on, like, what do you like? Because he was a hippie, and in a nice way. But and I think like there's this mystique about these eras, like that you were too young to have experienced, and it kind of feels cool to like travel back there and maybe see what it was like, maybe. And I think with vaporwave and stuff, we're seeing like these other youth subcultures where we're maybe seeing another version of that, where there's a lot of people who kind of find it compelling just that whole time, so I think, but in terms of like just purely using an operating system, one of the feelings I wanted to capture was when I, like in 97 and then 99, we got the internet. I didn't, like when we first got the computer and the internet, I didn't know where the boundaries were to this stuff, and I don't know what was possible. And like I said, I was hoping to find that 3D world where people were chatting, and never quite found it, especially because we had dial-up, so it wouldn't have worked too well anyway. But I think there's something a little bit magical about like it's almost like stumbling upon a machine, like a machine that, and not knowing what the heck is this, and poking at it and seeing what it does. And we weren't trying to replicate Windows 95 or anything. So when you open this thing up, you see, oh, it looks like an operating system, but it has a lot of strange, quirky features, and I think that encourages people to like, I don't know, it fosters a little sense of wonder about what they might be able to do there. So
yeah, and I think that's kind of the area that I'm most intrigued by, because it does feel like it has so many of like the bells and whistles an operating system has. It does feel really open, and so I'm really intrigued. As you were building it, as you're adding these things in, how did you balance that like creation of a operating system simulator with like what is, I mean, for the folks who haven't played super deep into it, like a very narratively driven game. Like there is a point to this, there is a storyline, right? Like it does take players places. How do you balance those two, what seem to me very competing ideas?
Yeah, they are. It was pretty hard because we just started. I started with the web. I sort of, I don't know, is there a word for method acting? But it's when you're making stuff. But I was like using the page builder. No, so what I did, I drew a mock-up of a page builder right when we started, just from my dreams. Like this is what it would ideally look like, and a sequencer, a music sequencer. basically kind of a tracker, but in a beat sequencer form. And I sent both of those to Mike, who is the Hypnospace's coder, and I didn't expect this. I was expecting to see like Windows like temp graphics, but he cut up all my graphics, stuck them in there, and just basically within like a few months made them functional, like almost exactly what I mocked up in the image editor. And so a few things are crusty about the way he did it, and like that didn't quite match like what I was imagining. But as I was making pages, like, and certain things that were a little too crusty, of course we would touch up. But I think we both settled on this idea where it was like, you know what, like some of these things, let's just roll with them. And if it's a like when you open a new text box, when you start a new text element, it says hypnotext, or it says something like double click here to edit this text box or something. And it's really easy to just like make one of those and it gets lost in the hierarchy. And sometimes you'll just see double click here to edit this somewhere. But we're like, let's just pretend that that's just something users do, which is making a game where most of the content was created by amateurs is really good, because it's it's really cheap. Like anyone can make it. And I could just, very quickly make a lot of content, because it's not supposed to sell like a professional like presence or a big realistic world or something. And yeah, now I forgot what the original question was, but there you go.
No, that's great. And I think that, that's such a fascinating part of it, because it does feel, so much of the content you experience does feel so of the time, so genuine. And of course that means, that a lot of it is being made by kids who've just got their first computer and that kind of stuff. And you really feel that. So, and I imagine as a creator, that gives a lot of, almost psychological safety, knowing that like, oh, if someone finds a mistake, it's going to feel like it's, the character.
It doesn't matter. Yeah.
It's fascinating. So you mentioned there, Mike is your developer who's building this stuff. I'm really interested, like, what was the initial tool set? Like, what is Hypnospace Outlaw made in?
Yeah, Hypnospace Outlaw is made in Construct 2, which is, I mentioned Click and Play, which is almost more or less you could say a kid's game making software, not unlike like today's Scratch or stuff like that. And that turned into the Games Factory, which turned into Multimedia Fusion, which turned into Click Team Fusion, which is still going. And one of the Click Team like community people who I remembered when I was a kid, he broke off because of like, he stopped using the software because there were certain things he wanted to do and the developers weren't interested in that. And he started Construct. And so Construct is basically Click and Play. Fundamentally, the ideas behind it are basically what I was using when I was 11. So we were like, you know what? And I met Mike through the Click Team sort of Click and Play community as well a while ago. And we're like, we're comfortable with this. I guess we'll worry about porting and stuff later, because it's not great with porting. And so that's why we chose Construct. It's quite difficult to do some of the things we wanted to do, especially in a performant way in Construct. And we had to circumvent a lot of like the out of the box features, or like get a little hacky sometimes. But ultimately it worked okay.
Right. Yeah, I don't want to get too in the weeds here, but to my understanding, Construct is web technologies, right? Like it's HTML and okay, so now I'm like doubly fascinated about the page builder, because
it's web technology, okay. But it's like it's none of that's exposed. It's all like an event-based editor where it's like if variable is higher than blah, then do this, or if if this collides with this, then do this. So it's a visual scripting thing.
Got you. So it's not, like Electron where you're building applications in that stuff. It just, the output happens to be web technologies.
it outputs into like HTML5, like web technology, yeah. And which is was a problem, big problem for performance, because computers see that as not needing the GPU. So by default, it says no, don't use the GPU for this application, and unless you go in there and manually set our executable to run on the GPU, then it runs on the CPU only or integrated graphics, and it's just like some laptops have a dual like integrated graphics, and it just runs so poorly for some people, which a lot of people think is intentional and okay, but it's
that's incredible. I had that exact situation once with someone was like really low frame rate, and they just thought that was the walking speed. It's incredible. Okay, so one more question on that. So, because it's also on consoles, right? So
yeah, it had to be rebuilt.
Okay. So it's not the original Web Technologies version. It has been reworked in some way.
No, we worked with a company called Ratalaika, and they have their own sort of construct porting thing they've made. They do other construct games, and they used that, and they had to, because we circumvented some construct things, they had a little extra work to do to implement some of our custom stuff. But yeah, it's just rebuilt using their stuff. I don't know much about it.
Perfect. No, that makes total sense. So back to the, I guess, like the construction of the core game. So, there are various parts throughout the game where the narrative moves forward. There are time skips, there are jumps, this kind of stuff. How do you, amongst these web pages and the feature set of the operating system, how did you deal with like progression and access gating to features and that kind of stuff, like within this? I guess in my head it's like really a faithful operating system simulator, but I imagine that's not necessarily built like an operating system, right? How does that work?
Right. Okay, this will actually answer the question I forgot, because now I remember the old question too. But so that all has to do with how like the game was, kind of how development happened, which was first we made a big fake internet. Well, first we made the operating system, but then we made a big fake internet. And by we, I mostly mean me, make this fake internet. And just a pile of pages. And when I'd make a new page, I'd think of a kind of person, try to pretend to be like them. What would they do? How would they do? They know the technology well enough? How, what is their education level? Blah, blah, blah. And then when I'd make a new page, I would think, okay, well, what sort of zone are they in? Which in our game is like a neighborhood or like a community and sub-community. And then who would they know? And who would be their friend here? Who might they not like here? And then I would edit their page and say, hey, these are my friends. And then I would write in Notepad or something a list of their friends or enemies or whatever, and then I would go into the pages of people who are this new character's friends, and then I would go edit those pages again to add maybe some references to this new person I added and say, yeah, we're gonna go hang out and play tennis, meet in real life, or tennis. Yeah, sorry. And it just, development happened that way, where it was just very did whatever I wanted and tried my best to keep track. I had some spreadsheets after a while, because it got a little messy, and to keep track of who knows who, and who maybe this person has a crush on this person, and what is the other person's temperament, and what do they think about this person having a crush on them, and do they know? And then after a while, just had this whole pile of pages, and then really there weren't many violations at all, or wasn't any gameplay for a long time. It was just later on that we were like, okay, now how do we get these people in trouble? Like, what would they be doing wrong that the players can, and how? And the zones are players are given access to zones as they accomplish more. So first you have just like the sort of the blue collar flyover state, country people zone, and the the cafe, which is more like the sort of liberal sort of everyone's welcome kind of, sort of really 90s like people holding hands kind of zone, where they try to make it feel like it looks like a coffee house, and it has that sort of global village aesthetic to it and stuff. And that's just really is what it sounds like, is just like mostly random, maybe more urbanite people, slightly people who might go to a cafe. And some people are there by accident because it's the default zone, which I thought was kind of funny. And some people are like, hey, I'm not a communist. How do I move my page to the other place or whatever? and so then, after we had all this, though, that's when I started thinking about, and that's when Xalavier Nelson Jr., who did narrative design and he wrote a lot of the news articles too. He came on and really helped add some progression and helped make sense of this, and how to slowly unlock new zones, and how to do the time jumps after certain things happen. And so basically the fake internet was mostly made, the operating system features were mostly made, and then a game was stuck in there afterwards, which in retrospect, I kind of liked doing it that way, because you have a broad view of everything, and you can kind of, I don't know, I liked how that worked in the end.
Yeah, no, I think that what you described sounded, you really got to know the characters and why they were there and what they were operating in before the game arrived. And I imagine that's a very useful process for linking everything together. So you mentioned the creation of the tools between yourself and Mike, and I want to come back to those tools because you released them pretty soon after the 1.0 release, and we had the page builder and the music creator, and you released those out to the community and allowed them to kind of build whatever they want. How did that go?
It went it didn't take off. We do have, I don't want to discount what people have done. I think there's some pretty cool stuff out there, and if you click mods on the main menu, you can see some of the things people have uploaded that they've made. But I think it's a combination of being Windows only, when this game really, if any game would appeal to Linux or Mac users, this would be one of them more than I think your average game. And so we couldn't port them with it being sort of worth it. It would have been a lot of work. We would have to rebuild to port the tools to anything but Windows. Mm-hmm. And they weren't we polished them a little bit, but they're so fundamentally janky that with things that we just got used to, that for other people it's a bit of a there's a bit too much of a learning curve. And then the other thing, I think the other reason that it didn't take off too much is because sharing requires you to upload a zip to a modding website, and then there's no in-game way to share your pages and stuff, which we had preliminary plans for, but a combination of things led to us not doing that. Concerns about moderation was one of them. It would have just been a pretty big job to moderate that. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm surprised that you say it didn't kick off. To me, when I look at your Discord, there's still people making stuff today. I spent a good amount of time poking around that calculator trying to work out with how they built a whole app outside the page builder.
You know what? It when the tools came out, and it wasn't what I was hoping, but sure. It has been steady, and people have been making stuff. Yeah. So I think over the 3.5 years now they've been out, we do have a substantial amount of stuff people made, interesting stuff, but there have been no big game mods where people would add a whole zone of, sure. Okay, someone did add a whole zone actually, but new gameplay or anything like that, that we were kind of hoping for.
Yeah.
But not that I don't appreciate it's there are some really because there's a little scripting language that we made with like variables and stuff, and like the calculator you mentioned. There are other really interesting things. Cobalt by this it's a fella named Tom K. He's made so many different doodads, and they're all very impressive for the game, just for the heck of it. And very cool stuff.
Love an impressive doodad. So your next game, Dreamsettler, is also a fake operating system game. And this set me on a real journey where I was like, is this just because it's the natural sequel to Hypnospace? Or like, are you just really looking forward to building an operating system again? What's the motivation here?
Yeah, the motivation was in part like, well, we were what we were talking about right after Hypnospace was a kart racer where you can exit your kart and it becomes a FPS, but you don't tell anyone that until they discover it, and then you can go back through all the tracks and then realize and then explore them and go into the interiors in the FPS mode after you realize that you can exit your kart. And that was what we pitched. And then our publisher was like, how about you just do another one? Another Hypnospace, because people liked that. And we were like, because also that we hadn't done 3D yet. So to them, it was sounding quite risky. And it was, I think. But still might do that one. But and that's how that started. And decided to set it, I think originally they wanted to have it a little later, like when in our initial talks, like set it between like 2005 and 2007 or 8 when YouTube was just kicking off and stuff. But I decided to go more for the beginning of MySpace, like so 2003 to 2005 roughly. Yeah,
it's a deeply cursed period to set it. I can't wait to see some of the selfies that are going to be on these people's pages.
Yeah, and Flash was, I think, at its peak around then too. Yeah,
very cool. I'm getting the sense that a lot of your game concepts come from altered car games. Fundamentally, we've got Hypnospace Enforcer with the highway, and now a Mario Kart game. All operating systems.
I don't even like
cars
racing games. I don't know why.
Incredible. So you mentioned that original Genesis as a 3D game, and it's been a couple of years, and you've got, I believe, another developer has joined your team. Is it Mark Lacroix has joined?
Yeah.
So the team's a little bit bigger. It's a little bit time on. How has your development process changed? Are you still using Construct? Have you changed technologies?
We're using Unity now.
Awesome.
And again, having to wrestle against the software a little bit. Because Construct made it very easy to set a native resolution, and then just boom, everything's on the grid. Unity, everything is sub-pixels, and to get it to feel like a legitimate low resolution takes a lot of work, especially having to do with text. It's a pain in the butt, but things are working now, and it's things have been working for a while. But it's the operating system is much more robust. Like needlessly, it's really, it's we have to make the rest of the game justify it somehow, but it's just basically an operating system. Yeah,
it's very exciting. So very much following the arc of the first one that we discussed. Operating system first, and the gameplay is coming.
Yeah, originally the team didn't want to do it that way, but I intentionally, just did what I wanted. And right now I'm actually taking a break though, because I'm a stay-at-home dad right now. My son doesn't have a daycare spot, so we're waiting until January for that. So for last maybe 2 months, I haven't really been working much on it, doing side projects and stuff. But it's exciting, but it's scary because with Hypnospace, the resolution was 480 by 270 pixels. So not only did we have a low resolution, but we had a web-safe palette that I put together. I called it the Hypnospace palette. and I dithered everything using, Floyd Steinberg or Atkinson dithering to that palette. And that meant if I wanted to make a fake album cover, I could do a really bad Photoshop, scale it down to 200 pixels by 200 pixels, put dithering all over it, and it would look like pretty much like it could be a legit album cover. With this game, it's more or less true color, and it's 960 by 540. So the amount of time a single asset takes is just like it takes a lot longer to make a convincing asset. And I'm such a stickler for like it being convincing to a degree that it's just much longer to much more slow process.
That's fascinating. Yeah, that's a real consequence of the time jump I hadn't thought of. And if listeners are interested in that description of the asset creation that you described, you have a tutorial on your YouTube that you made for the community, right? That walks through that process of making Hypnospace assets. So I'd highly recommend checking it out. It was very, very illuminating to watch.
Yeah, I do. I should redo those. They're a little dated, but I think they still work with that software I used. So
yeah, sure. So whilst we're still talking about Dreamsettlers, obviously it's still to come. It's gonna, it's still in development. Is there any teasers, anything you can tell us for any of the Hypnospace fans who are listening about the upcoming game?
Yeah, some Hypnospace had a whole roster of like fictional musical artists. This time we're trying to like expand into like, for example, wrestling, professional wrestling. And there's a wrestler who, me saying this, I'll give it away because there's not that many of these guys, but he's a professional wrestler and he likes video games and streams them sometimes. And he's actually going to help us like this next year, ideally film it has to be this next year, film like a wrestling match for some of our like fictional wrestlers. I think that's going to be cool.
Incredible.
And it's a fun part for me is just filling it with fictional bands music. And there's some returning musical artists, especially some of them who had big personalities in the first game will come back around. And yeah, it's been pretty fun figuring out like how to do this because a big part of the 2000s was like, I guess 9/11 and we're like, well, will we have a 9/11 and how do we do that and what kind of a 9/11 is it and what's the thing? So we kind of like mixed but we kind of brought Hurricane Katrina backwards a little bit and 9/11 forwards a little bit and mixed them together. So we'll see how that goes.
God, yeah, that is such an interesting problem with like creating something that is like fundamentally about cultural artifacts of a time period. God, that's
because you got to have. That's one thing I wanted to do more here to make it feel more cohesive is make world events and make things from the world matter to people more, which, the internet is was mostly people's Sailor Moon shrines or recipes or whatever, but people did, especially as you get more into blogging and social media era, like you had more of a sense of like the time instead of just like reference material people were putting up or their galleries or whatever.
Yeah, especially as you start to explore MySpace, early social networks. Now, you're like the third in the series. This has to be like the Twitter generation, and how what a monster that would be. So,
can you imagine a game in 20 years about right now? Like, I don't think I would have an interest in playing it, but who knows? So that means I can't really be too annoyed at like any Gen X people who are like, why would you want to go back to 1998 in a computer? Ugh. Yeah. I can't fault them for that because I think I'll be the same way in 20 years. So.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. So I know we're getting close on time. So to kind of bring us out, you mentioned, some characters that are returning, have their own lives. One of the characters from Hypnospace that's very much, I guess, like escaped the game and gone on to release his own game is Zane Rock. So you've been working on a game called, and I will try and get the whole title here, Slayers X Terminal Aftermath Vengeance of the Slayer, which, was made by a character from Hypnospace, Zane Rocks. Can you tell us a bit about this game?
Yeah, it's a there was a boomer shooter or a early 90s sort of 2.5D shooter in the vein of Blood or Duke Nukem 3D or Doom. And the idea is that it's a mod of an in-universe game called Cataclysm, which is sort of a 1995 our world's version of Doom or Duke Nukem. And this is a mod that this kid and his friend started in high school and worked on it a bit, and then life happened, and then they forgot about it. But this Zane, his friend from high school, promised him at his own peril that he would help him finish their game, later on at, I guess at graduation or something. I don't know, some sentimental like promise. Bye, buddy, I'm going to college. And then Zane held him to it, and then they finished their game in earlier this year. and yeah, so we did a lot of stuff to like replicate the sector effects of like a Doom mapping to give it that sort of and like the limited palette, so the colors kind of snap when you to the next color in the palette when
Right.
things get darker. Build engine Doom vibe.
Yeah, and that's quite a genre jump from Hypnospace. How did you find building a shooter full stop, but especially a boomer shooter, which is a very distinct art form in itself?
It was a lot of fun. I was a big Duke Nukem fan as a kid, and I'd run around quoting Duke Nukem all the time. And it was a lot of fun. I loved, my favorite thing about those games are sort of the little dioramas you're exploring in the levels that are supposed to look like real places. So I liked making like a dollar store or all kinds of stuff that Zane might know from his life. Sure. He works at a dollar store in real life. So and I love to sort of trying to do some subtle storytelling with like the level design. Yeah. Like, for example, there's like a rich neighborhood, and Zane, everything is scaled way up in the rich neighborhood. Like your head goes up to the counters are like a little over your head, even though Zane is an adult in the game. Yeah. But I think I was thinking maybe his memories of these places are like they're scaled up because he only went in them when he was a kid at a sleepover or something. And they also have like cartoonishly like rich like people stuff in their house, which also from a lack of experience in a rich person house. But yeah, I thought that was fun. It also inspired just by amateur Doom maps Doom wads that people make, where they make their house. There's a famous My House wad that came out this year that kind of explored similar themes, or they make their neighborhood, and it's not really a great level per se, but it's just it's almost like a weird version of like a diary or something. Sometimes some of these wads.
Yeah, that reminds me of the Duke Nukem 3D map, which is like every event in British culture in the last like 20 years or something. That's
Duke Smoochum.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, God, wild. So I guess my final question to close us out here. So you've got a complete genre jump, lots of things going on there, but it's very rooted in Hypnospace. It's Hypnospace character referencing their events and lives in Hypnospace. How did you, as a developer with an audience, like how did you go about like who's playing Slayer X? Like how did you find the audience for that game?
Well, I started Zane's Twitter.
Yeah.
And I gave him a presence on Discord and Twitter. And so I actually had him join some retro FPS YouTuber Discords, and he just goes in there and talks about getting with people's moms. And he's for people who are listening, who haven't played Hypnospace, Zane is very, you would say, edgy, and he kind of didn't grow out of it. So he's like in his late 30s. He's a little gentler in some ways. He is a kid. He's a little contained now. He's a responsible adult, but his interests haven't shifted too much. He's still into like nu metal and sick and twisted clowns. He thinks they're awesome, and whatever. And so he's kind of like I would probably be a little like him if I like stuck around my hometown longer or something. But yeah. So and I legitimately and still like, even though I liked new metal when I was a kid and it was a little embarrassing thing and to wear the baggy pants, I still like that. I'll put on those albums sometimes. But yeah.
Perfect.
I hope
So
that
very much
answered your
like creating
questions.
the persona and having it inhabit spaces while people play these games. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think people were attracted to like that, like in the few people who knew Hypnospace from those servers kind of like explained it to everyone else what the heck was going on.
Right.
And I think leaning into it not being connected to Hypnospace in the marketing and stuff, and just letting it be Zane's game, and also letting it be, I didn't want it to be cynical. I wanted to kind of celebrate all that stuff, like a feeling. Because there's plenty of people who still love new metal and they still like those aesthetics, and I don't know. I liked just. Uh, and I guess the game does borrow a lot from this sort of 1999 and 2000 The Matrix thing, and Dragon Ball Z, like
Right.
this era of like, or animated music videos where they would put like anime to like new metal or Korn songs or System of a Down songs, and just that whole era. There isn't too much like pulling from that to a lot, like not directly.
Yeah.
So I thought that was like a nice sort of open door. Like I'm not competing with many people there. So I think the people who remember that era and for whom it resonates with, then they're attracted to it maybe. And it seemed to work out pretty well. Yeah. I think a lot, one thing that I guess bugs me, but it can't be helped just because of how kind of dumb Zane's humor and his one-liners are, and just how in your face the aesthetic is people think it was like a very quick meme joke thing, and we tried our best to make like a legitimately good shooter, like just with this rap, this aesthetic and this made by a sort of a juvenile guy. But I can't fault them for just thinking someone kicked it out in a month or something.
Which is a shame, because as we know, it took Zane 23 years to make that game.
It did take him 23 years. It took us two and a half years. Like there's some overlap in games, but yeah.
And was that Unity as well, that one?
Yeah, that's Unity.
Cool. Well, Jake, thank you so much. This has been, for me, a huge pleasure. So many topics I've had long on my mind about the game that have been delightful to explore with you. If people want to keep up to date on, what's happening with Dreamsettlers and your other game, where's the best place for them to follow your work?
I guess it's X, Twitter.
Rest in peace.
Yeah, rip. At JayTholen, J Tholen. Yeah.
Perfect. Alrighty. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe.